David Brewster here with New Brewster's Millions of Rants, and this is 10 classic rock bending licks. And string bending on the guitar is definitely very common and very popular. Probably the most popular technique performed on the guitar. Everybody bends strings. Well, maybe not classical guitarists or traditional old-timey jazz guitarists. They don't really bend strings that often, but seemingly everybody else does. And there is a stigma attached to jazz, where jazz guitarists don't bend strings. But they do. I mean, just listen to Django Reinhardt, George Benson, Pat Metheny, Mike Stern, John Scofield, Scott Henderson. There's tons of jazz guitarists that bend strings. But then definitely, in blues, rock, metal, country, and funk, string bending's everywhere. I mean, look at a guitar solo, and it's really rare to find a guitar solo that doesn't have bending somewhere. And some guitar solos, the entire solo is made up of bending. So anyway, if you're wanting to sharpen your bending technique, maybe learn some different approaches or ideas, for string bending, or you just want to review, some of these classic licks, this episode's totally for you. So here we go. So the concept and premise behind this episode actually came from a lesson that I submitted to Guitar Player magazine. This was about 4 or 5 years ago, and that lesson was never actually picked up. It's been on their back burner, ever since. And I haven't really heard any, update or info about it, so I decided to take that lesson and turn it into a video here on my channel. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to hit 10 very famous and very popular, bending licks from an assortment of different players and different songs from different decades and eras of rock, going all the way back to Chuck Berry, and then moving our way through all the way to Van Halen. So anyway, here's an image with the 10 players we're going to hit in this episode. One more thing before we dive in here. One of the most important things about string bending and to really gain control and this articulate kind of, movement and motion of pushing and bending a string to another pitch, it's reinforcing your bends. And definitely, wrapping your thumb around kind of the side of the fretboard and using your thumb for some leverage when you're pushing strings and bending those notes. That's really important. But then also reinforcing, the finger that you're bending with. Say you're going to bend with your third finger, you definitely want to line up your middle and index behind that finger to reinforce that bend to help you push. And you can do that with your pinky too. Like if you're bending with your pinky, you can line up your fingers to reinforce, on that string, and all those fingers can kind of help you push that note. And that definitely helps whenever you go beyond, say, a half step or a whole step. You start getting up in like a step and a half or 2 whole step bending. Think of David Gilmour or Steve Lukather or somebody like that. Jimmy Page for sure. But those type of bends you definitely have to reinforce. You couldn't do it with just one finger. You want to line up those fingers and reinforce your bends all the time as much as possible. Okay, to get started here, this is the granddaddy of them all. This is from Johnny B. Good by Chuck Berry from 1958. And this lick takes place during the famous, historic intro from that song. And this is his famous duck walk, bending lick, like this. Very basic, and it's really just a whole step bend. And we're bending this E flat up to an F, like that. So if you want to see that as a slide, slide E flat to F, and you can kind of hear what we're doing. But we're not sliding, we're bending right there. And this is actually a good kind of demonstration of a bend, because what we're doing is we're reinforcing, this E flat bend on the G string, and then we're moving over and fretting that F note and picking it like that. And I'm also using my thumb there on the side of the fretboard to help me push, that string up when I'm bending that E flat. And it's a choked bending lick, because you don't want to let those notes ring. We're not doing that. You want to separate the bend from the fretted, single note. Kind of played staccato and real choppy like that. Next up's a bending lick from The Wind Cries Mary by Jimi Hendrix from the album Are You Experienced? This is from 1967, and during that guitar solo from the song, you'll hear lots of double stop action from Jimmy, and then you hear this very signature bending phrase like this. One more time right there. Very famous lick, and there's actually, 3 bends happening in this phrase. So it starts with a bend right here, like that. Bend that B note up to a C sharp, and then that's a very common lick right there. This is a very signature move from Hendrix. He loved targeting the minor third. Think of this as C sharp minor, and he's targeting that E a lot. And he would, pick it like that with a bend, or slide it, like that kind of stuff. He loved hitting that minor third right there. And that's what he's doing in this lick. Classic guitar solo too, but I love that kind of syrupy, Hendrix vibe, in that lick right there. Really cool. Next up's a bending phrase from Eric Clapton. This is back in his Cream days with Sunshine Your Love, an eternal classic for sure. And during the guitar solo from that song, you'll hear this. He's starting with this real throaty bend, and it's on the G string, and he's bending that G up to A, and that's very expressive. So he's bending that G to A, and he's also grabbing this B over there on the B string with his pinky, and performs that melody. And he performs that melody using bends, which is really cool. Clapton's vibrato, check out his bending technique and style, because definitely back in the Cream days and the John Mayall days, those early Clapton days, I mean, his bending and vibrato was just amazing. Very soulful, very expressive, classic stuff. Next up's a bending phrase from the classic Whole Lotta Love by Led Zeppelin. Of course, we're talking about Jimmy Page, and this lick actually has a 2 whole step bend featured in it. And actually the solo from Whole Lotta Love is a great bending workout. There's some very intense bending throughout that whole solo. But this lick's like this. One more time. So we're bending this G note there on the 20th fret on the B string. We're bending that G up 2 whole steps to a B, which is really far. We're changing that G all the way up to a B right there. And you can see I'm using my thumb for some leverage. I'm pushing, with that thumb against the fretboard as I push that string. And so you're definitely going to have to use your ear, and you have to definitely notice when you hit that B note, you want to stop bending. So it's part, listening, and also part muscle memory too, as far as how it feels to bend that far. And you want that B in there. Really tough, and it'll definitely chew up your fingertips too, bending really far like that. Next up's a timeless released bend from Richie Blackmore, and this appears in Smoke on the Water from Deep Purple. A very historic song for sure. And it's this, kind of aggressively picked, almost staccato, released bend, like this. One more time. This written on the B and the high E string. You could do it over there too. But for whatever reason, I prefer to do it on the B string right there. It seems like I can grab that B string a little bit easier and kind of, release that bend. But that's what we're doing. You're going to do this, kind of opening, phrase, grab that C, bend it up a whole step to D, and then you're picking the bend as you gradually, release it like that. And then end, that F to G whole step bend on the G string right there. Like that. Very signature phrase, very famous bending lick too. But there's something about that, like really sitting there and kind of just slowly releasing the bend. You're kind of, working on bending that note, but then also kind of releasing that bent note too. And that takes a lot of, fret hand strength and control to do that. Next up's the super famous bending lick from Life's Been Good by Joe Walsh. This is back in 1978. And there's a very signature, phrase that he opens the solo with. And then he also does some of those really distinct, like half-step bends, like this. It keeps going right there, but he's bending this B up to C sharp and then grabs E to F sharp right there, the E on the B string, F sharp on the high E, like that, and then there's a bend and release on that B and then end on that A note, and then do that lick again but reverse the two fretted notes up here. Start with F sharp then E and then do that release bend B to A, like that. So the first phrase and then the second phrase. And that's where you hear this. And that's where he's kind of doing this like half-step milked bending right there. So he doesn't actually release the bend. He kind of keeps it up, like a whole step, and then he kind of releases it a half step, back up a whole step, half step, whole step, back and forth like that. Eventually you hear him move that down a whole step, like that, and then go back up a whole step. Very timeless bending, and definitely Joe Walsh has a lot of great bending licks hiding up his sleeve, and that's just one of them right there. Next up we have some classic hybrid pick bending from Billy Gibbons, and this came from I'm Bad, I'm Nationwide by ZZ Top. A classic track for sure. I love this song. And definitely Billy's notorious for using hybrid picked ideas, in his licks and solos and stuff. Like this. One more time. So right there you can see we're bending this F up to a whole step to G. And then right there he's going to basically hybrid pick that C on the high E string on the 8th fret like that. Add some vibrato, and then do that bend again. And then you're going to basically end that phrase on that lower C right there. And then do the first phrase. And then you're way up here, for the end of that little solo right there. But that's a really cool phrase, and I like those snappy hybrid pick bends like that. Next we have another extended range bending idea, but this time from David Gilmour, and Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 by Pink Floyd, a timeless song. And this is the opening to the guitar solo, and you hear this extended range bend like this. One more time right there. So this is tricky, it's in D minor, and we're starting with this. So that's simple enough, kind of, innocent enough right there. So there's two bends right there, right here, and right there. These double stops, and then this is where you hear the extended range bend. So you're definitely hearing, the C all the way up to an E. That's really hard to do. Definitely reinforce the bend. I'm also pushing with my thumb. And once again, I'm using my ear and muscle memory to kind of remember how far that note has to go. And my ear's basically waiting, for that high E. And once you hear it, then you know you're on the right note right there. But that's very demanding, very easy to break a string if you're not really, skilled or aware of what to do. And that's tricky, so don't hurt yourself. But definitely you can work on, whole step. You could work on step and a half. And then eventually kind of work your way up to that, 2 whole step. Next up's a lick from the mighty Steve Lukather, and this came from the song Rosanna, the Toto classic from Toto 4. And this actually has one of Lukather's pinky grab bending ideas. So check out the solo from Rosanna and you'll hear this lick. One more time. Really interesting phrase. I love this. And there's a lot of guitarists that have stolen this idea from Lukather. I'm hearing this lick, out there in the modern world. And it's like, hey, you guys stole that from Steve. But it starts right here. So you're kind of moving between that D and that F note, and then you're bending that F to G. And there's where that pinky grab is. So you're going to basically move between that D and F, you're bending that F to G, then you're going to hike up and you're going to basically bend this G up to A, and then your pinky is going to fret a note while you're still holding that bend. Like that. And that's very unusual to hear a bent note held. And then you hear another finger to fret a note even higher right there. And that's definitely a signature Lukather move. He does that a lot in his bending, licks and phrases and stuff. Just kind of grabs that pinky, to extend the note even further up. Alright, last but not least is the mighty Van Halen with Panama and some of Eddie's signature tapped bending. And definitely Eddie helped popularize and kind of pioneer some of these sounds. You can also hear tap bending from players like Steve Vai and many others. But Eddie's actually tuned down the half step. In Panama, I'm just going to demonstrate this in standard tuning. If you want to play along with the album, tune down a half step. But in Panama, you'll hear this. Right? Real short and sweet, but like that. And on the record, it actually sounds like this. Because it's down a half step. But it's actually physically played right here. So right there, you're bending E up to F sharp right there. And then while that's, that E to F sharp bend is held, you're going to tap this little series of notes. You're technically tapping 14 to 12, 14 to 16, which that's A, G, A to B. But with that bend held up, a whole step, all those pitches are going to sound, a whole step higher. So instead of this, it sounds like... And Eddie definitely loved doing that. I mean, obviously that's from Panama, a very, very famous example. But you can hear him do that in other songs and other solos too. But definitely, Panama is legendary. It's just really interesting to hear that phrase. It's so smooth and kind of effortless. It sounds like something Eddie, had done for decades, which he probably had. But the way it just sits in that song, it's perfect. Alright, that's going to wrap this look at 10 classic rock bending licks. And I meant to mention this at the beginning. I don't remember if I did. But I could make 100 episodes like this. I mean, I left out some very notable and important players. I didn't include my favorite guitarist, Jeff Beck. Jeff Beck, was a bending wizard for sure. I mean, there's tons of players that I didn't include. But it's just kind of a sample, an assortment of different players from different decades and different, albums and stuff. And there's no shortage of bending licks. I mean, there are thousands, if not tens of thousands of different ideas and techniques and licks and ways of putting bends, mixed together with fretted notes and guitar solos and fills and licks and stuff. Very exciting, very interesting. And also the benefit from working on this. Yeah, you're going to chew up your fingertips, but you're also going to strengthen your hand and really develop, this kind of conviction and authority when you play by working on bending. And also vibrato too, don't forget vibrato. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.